Hello, my name is Tony. After playing the Sundance Kid in the most popular film at the box office in 1969, Robert Redford was elevated to superstar status. Superstar? Not superstore, madam. Get your hearing aid fixed, you cloth-eared bat. In Hollywood, he could write his own ticket. Women loved him, men respected him. Some men probably loved him as well, certain types of men. Or if they didn't respect or love him, they envied him. And everyone wanted to work with him. Offers and scripts poured in like a torrent. The world was his lobster. So over the next 3 years, he made 6 pictures that were what might be considered less than safe bets, and mostly turned out to be less than one might term commercially successful. In '69 was the politically motivated, based on a true story western Tell Them Willie Boy Is Here, and the frosty downhill racer, Michael Ritchie's directorial debut, in which Redford played a cold, arrogant and ruthless Olympic skier. Little Force and Big Halsey followed in 1970, a film about dirt bike racers, which had Redford playing a charming but unsympathetic character. In '72 came Jeremiah Johnson, the subject of this review. Then Ritchie's second film, The Candidate, a satirical political comedy drama, and finally The Hot Rock, a comedy heist movie based on a novel by Donald E. Westlake. It was scripted by William Goldman and directed by Peter Yates. Redford co-starred with George Segal. Despite talent and pedigree, the film bombed, much to Peter Yates' surprise. In '73, Redford went full-on Hollywood money-making machine, reuniting with Paul Newman for The Sting and pairing with Barbra Streisand in The Way We Were. Both films were colossal hits. The Sting in particular was ace. So what does this say? To me it infers that Redford, like comparative Hollywood pretty boy equivalent Warren Beatty, didn't want to be seen as just face, hair, smile and cheesecake. He wanted to take on roles that didn't just reflect and trade on his image and nothing else. But if he was going to get to do the stuff he wanted to do, there would have to be compromises. Every so often he'd need something that brought home the bacon. Eastwood found pretty much the same thing. For every personal project he got funding for, Warner's wanted something populist in return. That's how the game was played. Jeremiah Johnson is certainly not a glamorous film, nor a typical Western project. The focus is on mountain men, trappers in the Rocky Mountains, and lives lived in isolation, endurance, hardship and peril. It was something of an unexpected hit in the States, where it made $44 million against a budget of $3. It was the 6th highest grossing film of 1972 in America. Not Butch Cassidy numbers, but not too shabby. Redford is Jeremiah Johnson, a disenchanted former military man who decides he wants to distance himself from civilization and warfare. He aims to be a mountain man in the Rockies, which he sets out to be, completely underestimating the survival skill set required. He starts out utterly fucking hopeless, in danger of freezing or starving to death. Until he runs into Bearclaw Chris Platt, Will Gear, a veteran mountain man fixated on hunting, killing and eating grizzly bears. Bearclaw takes pity on him and teaches him the tricks of the trade. There are 3 Native American tribes in the Rockies, the Flatheads, Blackfoot and Crow. Of the 3, the Crow are the most warlike and bloodthirsty. When Bearclaw and Johnson are intercepted by a Crow hunting party, Johnson gains favour with their leader, paints his shirt red, Joaquin Martinez. This cordial relationship doesn't last, however. Striking out on his own, Johnson happens on the home of a family of settlers. They've been butchered and scalped by a Blackfoot raiding party. The surviving woman, Alan Ann McCleary, is driven insane by trauma and grief, and her young son, Josh Albee, stricken mute. After burying the bodies, the woman, Johnson reasons, has been touched, in other words, gone totally tonto, and will therefore be feared and revered by the Indians, meaning she'll be safe from further attacks. She makes plain to Johnson her intention to end her life and demands he take the boy with him. Saddled with a kid whom he decides to call Caleb, Johnson sets off again. They run across mountain man Del Gu Stefan Girash, buried up to his neck in sand by the Blackfoot raiding party. The Indians have stolen his horse and belongings. Rescuing Gu, Johnson is persuaded to help him retrieve his possessions. Cautioning against violence, Johnson and Gu sneak into the Blackfoot camp under the cover of night. When the Indians are alerted, Gu opens fire and all the Indians are killed. Goo then sets about scalping the dead, a practice Johnson wants no part of. Travelling on, Johnson, Caleb and Goo encounter a tribe of Flathead Indians who have been Christianized by a French missionary. Initially, not knowing what tribe they are about to encounter, Goo slyly transfers the Blackfoot scalps to Johnson's horse. This is important, in part because when Johnson gifts the Blackfoot horses and scalps to the Flathead chief, if the chief cannot reciprocate with an even greater gift in return, then he will be insulted and the white men must be killed. Johnson must therefore accept the gift of the chief's daughter Swan, Del Bolton, in marriage. This is the start of the growing mythology of Jeremiah Johnson, who is now known as the great warrior who avenged the crazy woman by killing and scalping the Blackfoot raiders. Goo sets out on his own and Johnson now has a boy and a wife in tow. This section of the film is an idyllic sequence wherein the trio bond and start to interact as a family unit. It results in them building a log cabin by a river and setting up home, which is all well and good until a US Army cavalry unit arrives looking for Johnson. They want him to lead them on a rescue mission. A wagon train of settlers have become trapped in the mountains, a treacherous and snowbound area, and Johnson apparently knows how to get there. Their route leads them to a sacred Crow burial ground. Johnson strongly advises going around, but Lieutenant Mulvey, Jack Colvin, can't spare the time. Once the settlers have been located, Johnson returns by the same route, and realization strikes that some of the trinkets now adorning the graves in the burial ground belong to Swan. He reaches his cabin too late. The Crow have murdered and scalped Swan and Caleb. After burning down the cabin with their bodies in it, Johnson sets out on a campaign of revenge against the Crow, a violent and bloody process which leads to the film's branding iron to the brain conclusion. When consideration is given by film fans and critics alike to what constitutes the great American movie, there's always a lot of diversity of response along with the usual suspects, your Citizen Kanes, Casablancas, Sounds of Music, Godfathers, Jaws, etc. usually a given. I've never read or heard of Jeremiah Johnson ever getting a mention or citation. In fact, these days it appears to be only faintly remembered, if at all. If you were to ask Joe Soap to cite the top 3 Redford movies, you'd probably get variations of Sundance, The Sting, The Way We Were, Out of Africa, All the President's Men, and the like. Me, though, it would be more The Sting, 3 Days of the Condor, and Jeremiah Johnson. Jeremiah Johnson is a great American movie, a classic piece of historical cinema. Trust me, it is. Screenwriters John Milius and Edward Arnholt fashion an episodic story, something of an odyssey, with a chain of set-piece moments that dovetail together to form the narrative. Johnson starts out an enigma, and by the end we know nothing more of his history, yet we gain greater knowledge and understanding about the man and mythic figure he becomes. Therein lies some clues as to just how mythology is generated, and it's mostly by accident through circumstance, assumption and misinterpretation. The killing and scalping of the Blackfoot Braves were actions Johnson was opposed to, but if Goo had not fired the first shot that night and later transferred the scalps to Johnson's horse, then his reputation as a great warrior and mythic figure would not have been kick-started into gestation. Later he tracks down and takes on single-handed the Crow raiding party in revenge for the deaths of Swan and Caleb. He kills all but one. The one he leaves alive tells the tale, a tale of how one man killed many braves with bullets and in ferocious hand-to-hand combat, in so doing enhancing and perpetuating his mythic status, which wasn't what motivated Johnson's decision to spare him. More likely it was to send a message. Many single Crow warriors are sent to ambush and kill Johnson, and one by one he kills them all. When he returns to the cabin where Caleb lived with his family, he finds it occupied by new settlers, terrified of an Indian attack. There the Crow have fashioned an elaborate shrine, and Johnson is the subject of it. The patriarch of the settlers tells Johnson the belief is that he can't be killed, and some say he never will be. It's a beautifully woven tapestry, well crafted and stitched together. Director Sidney Pollack, with whom Redford worked a lot, switches seamlessly between scenes of intense violent action, environmental terror and threat, and those of a gentler, more intimate nature. The rough-hewn idyll as Johnson, Swan and Caleb Caleb travel together, coalesce as a family and set up home, reveals that Johnson is a man capable of kindness, affection and love. It's marvellously composed and shot, but Pollock takes care to punctuate it with reminders of the ever-present dangers. Johnson travels to the high country on a buffalo hunt and is attacked by a ravening pack of wolves. He returns wounded and bloody to be nursed back to health by Swan. Why would anyone isolate themselves from civilization to live a life of solitude in the most inhospitable of environments? Well, most of the mountain men, Hatchet Jack, a corpse when Johnson finds him frozen to death, Bearclaw and Goo are all eccentrics, oddballs, misfits, who sought to live life on their own terms in and with nature. For Johnson, who seemed more rational and grounded than most, it seems like a logical move. A sane response in a mad and maddening world. Towards the end, when he meets up with Bearclaw again, both men realise they don't actually know what month or year it is. Time and indeed the demands and constraints of society have ceased to matter to them. When Johnson asks the lieutenant how the war is going, he replies with, "Which one?" The world moves on, but in the high country a timeless quest for survival is the only real concern. Existence broken down to its barest essence. In a way, it's a life that is a testament to living in the moment in absolute purity. The locations are spectacular, filmed in Redford's adopted home of Utah. The cinematography and the landscapes captured by the lens of Duke Callahan, who later worked on the Yakuza and Conan the Barbarian, are nothing short of stunning. The sense of the sweeping timelessness and power of nature is at times an almost overwhelming spectacle to behold. From icy mountainous vistas to barren deserts and wooded forests, you get a visual travelogue of splendor. Acting-wise, Redford still looks like a matinee idol, but it's one of his best, leanest and most heartfelt performances. He does well with projecting crippling shock and grief at the deaths of his Indian wife and adopted son, and equally as well with his determined and wrathful quest for revenge. Might be his best screen performance. Everyone else is convincing, at the very least, giving the production a pleasing ring of authenticity. Of equal importance, I must add, is the musical score by Tim McIntyre and John Rubinstein. Despite being actors, they were also musicians. Kids who auditioned for Pollock with a demo tape, which impressed him sufficiently to bag them the gig. The score is great, but the line sung by Tim McIntyre at the very end closes the film in a powerfully unforgettable way. Well, I never forgot it anyhow. What was it now? Oh yes. Here's the spoiler, so skip past it if you don't want to know. Johnson sits on his horse perched on a snowy ridge. Some distance below, he is faced by Crow Chief Paints his shirt red, sat on his horse. Johnson reaches for his rifle, but Paints his shirt red raises his arm, open-palmed in a gesture of peace. Johnson contemplates his next move. Then, very slowly, raises his arm also, returning the gesture, signalling peace between them. The camera freezes on Johnson, and McIntyre sings, "And some folks say he's up there still." Bang! There you are. That's how you do it. That's how you cement and fully establish the mythological status of a movie character forever. The last word. You can almost believe that Johnson is still up there in the high country today in some form or other, and for all time. Excellent. If I was going to be picky, I suppose I'd have to say it's not a film for everybody. Some might not find it to their taste. And that is fair enough. Some of the dialogue is a bit clunky and uninspired, but it's a small thing. And maybe when he's starting out, Johnson is portrayed as more naive and dumber than needs be, who flounders about chasing fish in a stream in sub-zero temperatures, or builds a fire beneath the branches of a snow-laden tree. Right, I wouldn't last 5 minutes on an outdoor camping trip in winter, but even I'm not quite that fucking clueless. Jeremiah Johnson is a slice of great American cinema with story, action, heart and soul. It's loosely based on the exploits of real-life mountain man John Jeremiah Garrison Johnston, who was a much less user-friendly character than the one Redford portrays. Talk about scalp hunting, the real guy was far more hair-raising if historical accounts are to be believed. Still, the fictionalized version is more than fine with me, and a tremendous exercise in informing how Western myths, legends, and damn good movies are made. Thank you most kindly for your time and attention. Feel free to do whatever you choose to do next. Hit like, don't like, comment, subscribe, check out my early access Patreon thing, or even make a very welcome financial contribution via the thanks button. Always like getting those. I've spent my entire life living surrounded by mountains, but never felt the urge to camp out in any of them. The great indoors for me, people, which is where I will compose my next video review. Soon, pilgrims.